epistles. You can see it all over the place. So they didn't really whittle it down to what we have now until probably the second through the fourth, fifth centuries. And within Christianity, they did the same for what we now refer to as the New Testament. But it wasn't until around the fifth century that we have the notion of the Bible as a single volume of text. And so
Now, who did
when
that?
that
Just for the
was,
listeners, like,
yeah,
who did that? Like, who was the grand poobah that had the authority to go, this is the word, and this is
yeah.
what you get to read and nothing else?
Well, it kind of slowly crystallized over multiple centuries, and the main influence, at least for the Christian canon, was probably what books were considered appropriate to quote and preach from in your congregation, in the meetings when your community came together. And so the earliest canon lists that we have are basically reports of what books are being used in congregations and which are not. And then there are a few different tiers. It's not a binary, it's more of a spectrum where it's like, well, this is spurious, this is okay, this is considered authoritative. And the list differed close to the margins, but around the late 4th century CE, we have this dude named Athanasius of Alexandria, who's a leader of the church in Egypt, who is trying to clamp down on what he sees as heterodox practices in literature. And so he creates one of the first authoritative canon lists, where he actually says these are all the books. And he's one of the first, in fact, I think he's the first to assert that the book of Revelation should be part of our canon. And he finishes by saying, this is the list. Curse anybody who adds to it or takes from it, kind of in the same tradition as Deuteronomy and the book of Revelation. And that was what ended up kind of guiding the discussion after that. But you have some councils that kind of take a look at these lists and say, yeah, this works for us. But when this was going on, this was a version of the scriptures that was recorded in Greek. So even the Old Testament was recorded in Greek, and so included some of the apocryphal books, and they were part of that in between. They were deuterocanonical.
Right.
They were considered of a second tier, but still within the canon. And it wasn't until the Protestant Reformation that folks like Luther start saying, "Nah, we got to leave this stuff to the side, not completely out, but at least to the side." And so instead of having the Apocrypha worked into the Old Testament, he gathered it all together and he put it in a different section. So you had the Old Testament, you had the Apocrypha, you had the New Testament. And Luther actually also wanted to get rid of things like the Epistle of James and the Epistle of the Hebrews. And other texts that he did not think were authoritative. And so he also moved them in like an appendix, and that didn't stick. But the moving of the Apocrypha into a separate section did stick. And
Right.
Protestants continued to use the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha was published in the King James Version in 1611, for instance. And, you know, a lot of publishers
That's
had
the one
editions.
I have.
That's the one you have, the
Mhm.
1611? And you know, there were numerous editions and reprints and versions of the King James Version, and some of them included the Apocrypha, some of them didn't. And then in the 19th century, that was kind of when Protestants decided, you know what, we're just going to leave it out. And it was publishers like the British and Foreign Bible Society and the American Bible Society that probably made the decision initially because it made for a slimmer volume. It was easier to ship. It was easier to source. It was cheaper to print. And by the end of the 19th century, Protestants pretty much decided the Apocrypha was not for us anymore. So it's a series of decisions and then chasing down the implications of those decisions, making more decisions and chasing down the implications of those decisions, and so on. So a lot of people like to think about it as everybody thought one thing, and then there was a day where everybody decided they were just going to think another thing. And it's not how it worked at all. It was a bunch of people getting together, arguing about stuff, and just kind of slowly, incrementally, you get these ideas
Negotiating down to what it is.
Exactly.
And that's all right. And so in that, you know, I thought I had a saying, a good reason that we use books and not scrolls. Is, for instance, the oldest scroll that we have of, I think, Isaiah is 26 foot long.
It's pretty long.